So all these dates are also in the module guide. These slides will also be on Blackboard, but feel free if you want to either start noting them down now and or getting them put into your phones or your calendars or whatever else you use these days to monitor these kinds of dates. And particularly this semester, it's getting your head around what's happening this semester. So first of all, the module guide does suggest what you should be submitting, thinking about first of all, is a confirmed topic area form. All of you, or most of you, the vast majority of you, have already submitted an initial topic area form. We use that piece of information to help identify a possible supervisor. But the idea is you should really submit another one, a confirmed topic area form, that's a bit more detail. That's the point at which we won't really let you change your mind in terms of topic. And it's all about stopping you just drifting and leaving it, so October comes and goes, November comes and goes, next thing you know it's Christmas, and you haven't really decided what you want to do. It's about getting you to commit to a topic. So it's something, if you feel as though what you'd already thought about doing, topic-wise, not in terms of methods and the precise details of it, but topic-wise, you don't want to change your mind, then you could pretty much draft that now. That shouldn't take that long to do. But I'd suggest doing it with some consultation with the supervisor to make absolutely sure they're happy with it. That form asks about possible methods you might use and so on. So that is something you're supposed to submit. You would submit that to your supervisor. And that can be via email, it could be a hard copy, signed, whatever it might be. The main thing there is so it's going to your supervisor, so between the two of you, you've agreed and confirmed what your topic is. That's one of the first things. Is that okay? Any questions about that? Somebody walks above us. And that form, a blank version of those forms, is on Blackboard. Okay, so that's the first one of the first things. Now the next thing is something which is especially important, and it's getting our heads around these dates. All of you will need to submit an ethics form. You will need to get ethical approval for the study you're going to be doing, because you're going to be collecting data, and that raises ethical questions. We need to make sure we can approve that project. We being the Psychology Ethics Committee, which will look at these submissions on behalf of the University Ethics Panel. So it's something we take extremely seriously, so you need to take it very seriously as well. Now there are 3 possible dates you can submit your form. So you're going to be going for one of these dates, as in they link to 3 separate meetings of the Ethics Committee. So we'll convene meetings at certain points in the first semester so we can consider your ethics submissions. The first of those dates is 22nd of October, which is pretty soon. Today's the 1st of October, so 3 weeks or so. If that's a Wednesday, it's 3 weeks exactly. So if you think that you've already got pretty clear the proposed ideas you may have had for your proposal you presented, if you're fairly confident that you've got that pretty clear and you haven't changed your mind, you'll want to get some feedback and some thoughts from your supervisor, because you might not yet discuss that with them, you wouldn't have done, then that's maybe a date you will go for. Our expectation is typically that's not the majority of you. There could be a small number of you who are already in a position and you want to start as soon as possible. Occasionally we get some people who are saying, I want to do it over the summer that's just gone. We say, well, great to be so enthusiastic about it, but for one, the dissertation module starts now, and we need to have time to give ethical approval. So if you are in that position where you're all ready to go, then you might consider going for that ethics deadline. But another piece of feedback or suggestion would be, don't try and rush it. Don't feel as though it's really important to get there, so you rush something. Ethics forms aren't things you could or should rush. You've got to think through in detail what your planned study is going to be, and you'll see when you look at the ethics form, it's asking you for some detail about that. It will mean you will also have to include any copies of questionnaires you're going to use. If you're doing interviews, then an example of the interview schedule. Materials you're going to be using, that kind of specific information needs to be in there. So that's one, that's the early deadline. The next one, which we typically find most of you will be aiming for, is the 12th of November, so it's not long after it. There's a final kind of catch-up one on the 10th of December. So the idea is you will need to get ethical approval. That's the underlying message here. So once you've got your confirmed topic area done and agreed upon, then you're looking at that ethics form. Working on that with your supervisor, getting their feedback on it, drafting it, So don't feel as though, well, I'll write something on the 11th of November and send that to my supervisor for the first time. The odds are it may not be quite in shape to go forward to the ethics committee. You should have had some interaction with your supervisor about that. So let them help you with it. You're writing it still, but for example, my students, I would expect to have seen drafts of it before then, because it will often need redrafting. So as soon as possible, look at the ethics form, get your head around what's being asked there, know what you need to put in the information, start drafting it once you know what your topic's going to be. Okay? And they're your 3 deadline date. Any questions about that? Because that is particularly important. Anybody else on the team, because they send it, other questions or?
Yeah, what happens if it gets the 10th of December and I still haven't got ethical approval?
It's a very good question. What does happen, Sarah? If you get to the 10th of December and you haven't even submitted an ethics form, then there's going to be huge problems because you're not in a position to get ethical approval. So at one level, we don't want to consider that possibility because hopefully that won't happen. What's potentially more likely, and we do occasionally get, is folks who either submit for that final one, and as part of it, so it does get submitted, it gets looked at by the ethics committee, but for whatever reason it doesn't get approved, then we're faced with, well, there's no more meetings ethics committee. Well, in those exceptional circumstances, we will have to look as an ethics committee to reconvene in early January to consider still changes that's going on there. So we will do what we can to help you with that, but the message is, this is really your final chance. Is that a fair answer, Senna? Do you think that's an appropriate way of describing it? Because if you don't get ethical approval, you can't go and collect data. If you can't collect data, you can't do dissertation, so on and so forth. So it's all about trying to get you to start thinking about it sooner rather than later. I would also suggest that for other modules you're doing this semester, the majority of any assessment will probably be coming towards the end of the semester or something. So it's where you need to be thinking about doing work now. It's just where a lot of activity happens in terms of dissertation. It's early on. Don't think I'll go to it at some point. It's not due in until sometime next year. There's quite a lot to be done until that point. It's all about managing those dates. Any other questions about ethics forms? Yeah?
How long does it take to find out whether it's been approved or not?
Good question. So the question is, how long does it take to find out it's been approved? Well, let's say so for the deadline of the 22nd of October, that is a Wednesday, isn't it? So the meeting we're having there is the following Wednesday, because we need the time to circulate those that are being submitted, read them, comment on them, and then we convene the meeting. Cheryl is the ethics chair, and she's typically very good, working particularly on this meeting where we have lots being submitted, to get that feedback out pretty quickly. I know that's a bit, I would sort of say, and be careful what I commit to it, within days, within a few days. I mean, sometimes it may well be that same day, but that's really pushing it. If there's quite a lot to work through, you should get feedback quite quickly. So it may liaise with your supervisor to say, well, as the committee met, what's the outcome? In terms of things not being approved, again, that's a rarity, so don't feel as though you're going to get knocked back. You have a great idea, but the committee's not going to approve it. Often it's because things aren't completed properly. There's not enough information submitted. You haven't included questionnaires or whatever, which has been asked for, so it gets not approved because we just can't approve it. We haven't got the information. That's where the interaction with your supervisor will hopefully mean they're forwarding something to the committee, which they at least feel as though it's ready to be looked at by the committee. And will hopefully give some sense of maybe whether they at least think it's something which could be given ethical approval, but they cannot speak on behalf of the ethics committee. And that's where you get the discussion about. There's no hard and fast rules in terms of that's ethical, that's not ethical. Guidance about it, available in the BPS Guide for Ethics, Human Research Ethics, copy of which is on Blackboard. That should be a great place to look for in terms of the kind of things that may be issues. But the general things are things like anonymity. Are you going to suggest anonymity, how that works, confidentiality, how you'll treat data, people's right for withdrawal, all these kinds of questions you should be exploring and discussing with your supervisor. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's a good question, any other ones? Okay? So that's going to be the big focus for the next few weeks for you, because that's very important. Beyond that though, then of course, we suddenly jump to the next formal submission, which is the dissertation itself, which is now not until April next year. It's ages away. whole year away. Well, not quite a year, is it? Because already you count down the months. So it feels like a long way away, but they're your formal submission points. So again, the confirmed topic area form is to your supervisor. The ethics form will be submitted via email, i.e. an electronic copy, through your supervisor. They're not going through Turnitin. These are ones going through to your supervisor, okay? Because they need to then forward them to the ethics chair, who then circulates them. So make sure you're discussing that with your supervisor about what's required. Then the final submission is the 29th of April. We realise that's a big gap there, and there's lots to be done in between time. At this point, assuming you get approval, you kind of know what you're doing, you've been approved to go away and do it. All you need to do is do it, and analyse the data and write it up. Piece of cake. There's a lot to that, so we will provide extra, oh of course, I forgot there, don't forget the dissertation conference. That is after the dissertation submission, and we want you to encourage those of you who want to, as many as possible, to present at it, opportunity to share your experience. But again, there's a big gap between the ethics form and submission, so to help with those, we can suggest additional deadlines to help you pace your work. So for example, we would suggest that you might aim to get a draft of your introduction. That's going to be your lit review. I said lit review there, I thought I did. Lit review. So reviewing what's gone before, how your research or your project would build upon it. Get a draft of that by 23rd of January. Now this is something you need to liaise with your supervisor about. Whether or not they think, well, it has to be on that date, or they'll look at it before then, or they'll even accept something after then. And between you and me, some people don't submit something at that point. But I would say you're losing opportunity for feedback. If you submit something there, you will get often, sometimes, quite good detailed feedback on what it is you've submitted, opportunity to improve it. It also means you've got another deadline ahead of the actual deadline to get something done, drafting of things and so on. Helps pace your work. Similarly, middle of February we're suggesting for a draft method section. Draft dissertation, so the whole thing, so the idea is this would be a final date by which if you want to submit something, a draft of something, for feedback, for written feedback or verbal, however your supervisor wants to do it, then that's a final date for it. Now often it would be, if you've already done a draft introduction, say in January, and had some feedback on that, then it may well be at this point, if you drafted the whole thing, then well done you, that's really good to be at that stage that early on, but they may find that actually their feedback is more focused on elements they haven't already seen. Often the feeling is we don't want to keep providing feedback on the same bits that we've seen and again and again. Again, discuss that with your supervisor. But any final bits here, you might have a results section, sometimes those that are really, got a draft discussion section. Point being is, officially, that's the last date, because the last day for supervision, which we do keep to, is the last day of the term before we break for Easter. And we do try to keep to that across the team. So the idea is you don't find that people who have had little or no interaction with the supervisor suddenly show up over Easter expecting us to be available and around to liaise with you, look at drafts of things and so on. I mean, it's going to be due a little over a week after Easter's back, so the idea is that's the point at which you're kind of on your own. Now if you really are facing huge difficulties, then please do try and contact supervisors or me. We won't leave you hanging, but we need to kind of treat that on a case-by-case basis. It's trying to discourage people from just leaving it and leaving it and leaving it. So if you submitted something to your supervisor maybe on the 20th of March, hoping for feedback, then they could, within their right, say, well actually you've missed the deadline for feedback on that, because the idea is that gives us a couple of weeks. If we get 7 or 8 dissertation drafts, time to read them, provide comments and so on. Sometimes that can be negotiated a little bit. Again, it's all about discussing it with your supervisor. This one we keep to. So if you wanted to treat yourself, if rather than having that 29th of April as the deadline to work to, that's one to try and work to, because that's something where if you can get most of it pretty much done and drafted with feedback on it, then over that Easter break you've got time to refine it, make it even better. Is that okay in terms of those? Is additional dates.